Hello, friends. Welcome to another Transformational Trails conversation with Aemina Razzano and Vance. We've just had a very robust discussion about the uncertainty and the ambiguities and the stresses that causes us today, and how we can respond and how we can be more aware of how it is affecting people who are limited in their choices and need our assistance. So, Aemina and where do we pick up from conversation we just had?
I think the conversation we were having to bring everyone totally in is that we were talking about the fact that the news is filling a lot of people with constant stress and dread and fear. Um, and there is a lack of certainty about almost anything, um,
Mm.
which creates a lot of distress. And when I say about anything, I mean political, even medically. I mean, things are changing on the daily. And as far as vaccinations and access and all sorts of things. And so we were talking about how that is causing so much consternation and fear. And what do we do to address that? And then we were also having a conversation about the fact that some of us have privilege and we have the privilege and the ability to turn the news off and to make a choice. And how do those with privilege ground themselves and help those who are living under threat that some of us do not understand and do not experience? How do we help them find agency? What do you think, Lee? Is that a somewhat, is that an
Yeah,
okay summation?
yeah, yeah, that's great. I think part of what made the conversation that we were just having so robust is I came into the conversation. So we're thinking about the social and political moment that we're in and how much fear it's creating. And I'm thinking about a lot of allies. When I say allies, I mean people that are perhaps in the church in churches, have a pretty secure life, all things considered. They don't feel like me, they don't really have concerns that they'll be deported, but they're aghast that someone else is in that situation. Um, we feel pretty safe, but very unnerved. And I was thinking about the importance of people like that, like me, who need to do things to make sure that they are grounded and able to access their courage and their compassion and not be overwhelmed or turn away from the unease because we're overwhelming ourselves with the media. And Amina, you were highlighting like, well, let's think about the people that are listening to this that are not in that situation. They are in their homes, trembling. Their amygdalas are fully firing because they don't know that if they're going to be deported tomorrow, if ICE is going to come into their home tonight. Um, and so they're in crisis, right? Was that fair to say? They're in crisis mode. And so what do they need to hear? Because grounding and hey, accessing groundedness and courage and finding compassion in ourselves is not accessible to that, or not nearly as easily accessible to
Yeah.
that person, right? And so we were both kind of thinking about those groups of people.
Yeah.
Fair?
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know who is watching our recording right now, but I'm guessing there are probably a lot of white people who are in our churches who are listening to this, who have access to this. And I think it's really important to recognize our privilege that for a lot of us, we can leave our home right now and we can drive to work and we don't have to worry that someone's going to pull us over. And I was sharing with Lee and Larry that, I know someone, my coworker has a dear friend who is an American citizen, who happens to be brown and who was detained by ICE as an American citizen and can't be found. And so I was saying the ripple effect of this and the constant stress for people who are of color right now is terrifying. And so how do we, those of us who do have some privilege, how do we work on grounding ourselves so that when opportunity arises, we can step in and
Mhm.
using Lee's words with courage and compassion and
Mhm.
do that
Yeah.
and not wait and not be so overwhelmed that we can't engage. And Lee, I think that was a really important thing that you were talking about, as far as structure and making sure that we do structure our day. And that's something you've heard Lee and Larry and I talk about in the past, is that for traumatized people, structure and schedule is really important. Having things that we know we can count on is how we tame our amygdala, is how we really get back into our body and help us stay present.
Yeah.
So, Lee, you had some thoughts on that.
On staying grounded and present.
Yeah, and staying
Yeah.
grounded in things.
No, it's really so again, this is really good that we're sharing Aemina and I our perspective and where we're coming from because I am thinking about some like-minded white privileged born and raised in the US are distraught and stressed, but not under direct threat. Those are the people that I keep coming back to. And I want to say to those people that one of the best things that you can do that I try to do, not successful at it all the time, but I spend a lot of time praying, meditating, exercising. It's right over here. There's like my little peace corner over here where I spend more time there than I do watching the news because I know that my brain is going to orient toward whatever I expose it to the most. So if I keep it peaceful, if I keep my brain peaceful and grounded and centered, and I'm exercising, taking care of myself, drinking water first thing in the morning, have a healthy breakfast. Like I'm really kind of like a selfish little organism first thing in the morning. Like I'm just taking care of Lee's needs mentally, emotionally, and physically, more so now than I used to, because I know that something is going to threaten my stability later in the day, and I want to have the resources to act on it. Somebody is being directly threatened. I don't want to be so overwhelmed that I can't step in and say, no, that's not right. That's wrong. I want to be part of the solution. Or can I do something? Do you need food, shelter, water? Like to put myself into the crisis of somebody else is having is probably one of the best things I feel like I've chosen to do as a person. Like I can't control what's happening nationally, politically, in the world affairs, but I want to find how can I really help my next door neighbor? And I know that I can't if I'm not grounding. So I didn't mean for that to sound both like a speech um, mixed in with concrete advice. But I hope the advice is you hear that the advice is grounded in neuropsychology. That I really think it's important to be mindful and aware of how many minutes per day am I consuming news media as a white privileged person who's distraught but not under direct threat, versus how many minutes a day am I am I taking peaceful walks, right? Or praying or meditating or talking to people on the phone, mom, dad, a close friend, people I trust, and it just soothes me to talk to them, right? So it doesn't have whatever soothes you and cares for you, those minutes versus the minutes that I'm being inundated with this information is important. Not to say we shouldn't be informed. I think it's important to not avoid the news. But our neuropsychology is built such that if we are what we're consuming is what we're experiencing. What we're taking in is how we will start to live out our lives. And so I think it's, yeah, I'm just stressing the importance of that grounding versus the crisis that we're taking in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of framing it as far as how many minutes a day are you taking that in versus doing other things. I think that, you know, being able to have the kind of time to do some of those things. I know not everybody has that. And so I think really focusing on how many minutes per day am I taking in things that overwhelm me versus doing something else. You know, trying to get up in the morning and take care of little ones or take care of a parent or whoever your care, if you're not only taking care of yourself or you don't have someone else to help do those things, you may not have that time. So being mindful of what am I devoting my time to and recognizing that there are going to be days that you're going to take in more news or more stress than other days. There are days that I will read, you know, every single breaking news from the New York Times or Washington Post, and I read it all, and then I watch the news. And there are days where, gosh, if I'm honest, by midnight, I've consumed a lot of it. And then there are other days where I try really hard to limit how many minutes I'm spending doing that because I recognize that it becomes a cycle of anxiety and I need to do something else. And so I think Lee's, you know, minute to minute is really important. And then recognizing that life-giving things can be something that's, like Lee was saying, these are parts of his day. They can also be parts of yours that you may not have to cut out already. For me, you know, I'm a gardener. So at 5 in the morning, I'm out in the garden. And that's how I am coping. I am weeding, I am tending, I'm taking care of tomatoes, and that's how I'm coping. And that is just a normal part of my day. It's not, I am not having to cut out more time. So part of this is also for me, I think, thinking about how do we approach chores? How do we approach the things that have to be done every day? So if you're somebody who really hates the dishes, and you have to do them every day, can you turn it into something that is grounding and meaningful? Like you're stressed about the news or you're stressed about this. Can you think about when you're washing the dish, be like, I am washing this down the drain and I'm not going to think about it right now. So some of this, and maybe that sounds silly, but really when we can reframe some of the things that have to be done, it can help us. It can help be visual and actionable items that help us navigate. Because when I tell people, when Lee and I both are working with someone and we're like, try to get more exercise or try to cut out time for meditation or try to cut out time for whatever it is, I don't have any more time in my day. You know, I work with a lot of people who are working 12 hours a day. They don't. So part of that is how do we find awe and joy in the things that we are already doing? And for me, the one of the number one things that we need to be doing in these times is looking for what makes us say awe. And because awe is something that reconnects us to things that are transcendental, it reconnects us to one another, it reconnects us to earth. And for everybody, it's going to be something different. Some people are kitty people, like little kittens. I'm allergic to cats, so kittens do not get me all excited. Puppies. For some people, it's tinkering with a car and making it work or fixing a vacuum. For other people, it's taking a hike, it's gardening, it's cleaning the house. Because whatever makes you say awe is a good thing. So I know somebody who really, really loves to clean. And she's like, this is great. it might sound crazy to you, but we all find awe in different ways. So how can we tap into our current routines?
Mhm.
I'm listening to the two of you and I'm thinking about the importance of reframing these things. Ellen Langer has a great book. She's a Harvard psychologist. She has a great book called Mindfulness. And her book is all about, it's really more about mindlessness than it is mindfulness. But early on in the book, she talks about working with a group of cleaning people in a hotel. And she asked them, when do you have time to exercise? And they said, well, we don't have time to exercise. We're too busy.
Mhm.
So she said, she watched them and she said, but what you're doing is basically the same movement you would be doing as if you when you were exercising.
Mhm.
So why don't you just look at the work you're changing beds and you're cleaning bathrooms and you're carrying things and you're pushing things. It's exercise. So why not look at it as exercise? And they went, okay. So she did a control study where the group that she gave that advice to over a period of some weeks, their blood pressure went down, they lost weight. Doing the same, they didn't change anything about their lives. They were just doing what they do. But the reframing of that was so vitally important
Mhm.
to them, vitally important to not only their psychological welfare, but their physical welfare as well. They had tangible physical benefits
Mhm.
Yeah.
just from reframing.
Yeah. And that's it. It does work. And it is possible. Um, and I think that it's an opportunity to engage in our current life in a new way without having to add something new in. And also, I think it's totally okay. It is not selfish to say, I need 20 minutes today by myself. That does not make you selfish.
Mhm.
And I think we have this idea that carving out time for ourselves is selfish, or carving out time for ourselves is unproductive. And the reality is that doing so, whether it's running, gardening, meditation, watching, like maybe you haven't had a break and you need a book or a TV or something, carving out that little bit of time isn't a selfish act. It may be an act of privilege that other people don't have, but it isn't selfish. It is the way that we are able to then go and do more, go and be the people that we want to be, who we really are, our authentic self, who we are at our core.
Mhm. I have a question for you, Aemina. So again, I'm thinking in terms of people who are not under direct threat, and they're going to start, they are engaged in grounding themselves and making sure their lives are full, that they feel the unease and they feel, but then the stress hits because it's happening closer and closer. I think of compassion as empathy in action. So just as I'm sure we could talk a lot about the definitions of those, but it's feeling for the other, feeling some of what the other feels, but then taking action to try to relieve their suffering is compassion.
Yeah.
What's compassionate during these times? I'm just curious, as someone who's worked directly with people and seen directly people that are being affected, that don't have room to ground, they're in crisis mode, they're under direct threat. How can I be compassionate toward them?
I think that some of it depends on the person and the kind of relationship you have with the person. You can do different things for people that you have a relationship with versus not. I think one of the first things when I think about being compassionate to someone who's under direct stress and duress is holding space for that person non-judgmentally. Instead of looking at them and saying, you could, or you should, or why are you, immediately just saying, I am not in their skin and I want to extend compassion and grace. Um, I think that's one of the first things for me where compassion has to begin is in non-judgment. And then it's being creative and curious and brave. What do you need? If it's someone that you have a relationship with, what do you need? And sometimes recognizing that open-ended questions are horrible because the person's under so much stress. Can I bring you dinner? Can I get you a cup of coffee? Can I mow your lawn for you? Can I walk your dog for you? Is there something that I've mentioned that made you think of something else that you really need? Because sometimes if you give somebody some ideas, their brain starts to work. And so coming back and saying, did you think of something? Being able to recognize that someone you may not have a relationship with and you have a lot of compassion for, and what they need is they need you to be brave and be the voice that is going to your elected official and saying, hey, I have a problem with this. This isn't okay. And understanding that your elected officials are not just those in Washington. Your elected officials are those in your town, in your community. They need to hear from you. Your school board needs to hear from you. Everyone needs to hear who is in a place of power to enact change. They need to know how it is impacting your neighbor and the people you do have compassion for. So I think that again, it's a myriad. For me, it starts with non-judgment because we have to go there first. We don't know what it's like in someone else's skin. And then moving into the different places. Do I have a relationship with this person? If I don't, how do I enact my compassion? And being brave. It's really brave to say to someone, what can I do for you? It's really brave to say, may I bring you dinner? Because maybe the person's going to say no. Well, okay. So they say no. That's okay. And maybe you're going to call your elected official and they're not going to listen to you. It doesn't mean that your effort was in vain. So a part of compassion is being brave enough for somebody to say no and not give up.
Yeah. And not give up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that I heard like two different ways to respond, both non-judgmentally, but depending on the relationship that you have. If you have a close relationship, you might, or you have access to them, you might be able to develop a relationship or have an encounter where you can ask, what can I do? So you aren't prescribing, you're coming alongside them and saying, how can I be of service here? How can I help? And then the other one, I was even thinking about, you hear something in the news, hear something in the local news that bothers you. Not only is it brave to go to elected officials, but I'm just thinking about some of the people who, like at church, will, during prayer and request time, they aren't all that comfortable with taking the mic and saying what they want to pray for, but a couple of them I've heard have just taken it and said, I'm not okay with what's going on. I'm not okay with what's happening in our country. I'm not okay with with immigrants being deported. And I want to pray for them and I want to pray for change. Like more, so much power in just putting your voice out there. It empowers other people, and and that's one way. I was thinking as you were saying, that's one way to deal with distress is action, to channel it into action. Nothing worse than just like sitting back. I had this during COVID where I just like you get stunned by the news. That's where like you're overwhelmed by it, but there's nothing you're doing with that emotion. And that's really important. So it's reciprocal. It's good for me and it's good for my neighbor if I am taking compassionate action.
Right. And sometimes that compassionate action as we've hinted, means I need to take care of myself for a minute.
But I have a
Compassion
question.
fatigue is real.
Right.
I have a question for the two of you. I'm going to interject something here because it's something I've been thinking a lot about, especially this week. Um, the image of God in each other. I think it's important for us to cultivate the awareness and the ability to be looking for the image of God in each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about compassion, we're talking about empathy and the importance of those things. And somehow it has been really occurring to me this week that that is rooted in seeing the image of God in this other person.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on how that is a part of this discussion?
I think to me, it's just a central tenet of my faith. It doesn't matter anything about the other person. It doesn't matter their religion. It doesn't matter their ethnicity. It doesn't matter their gender, their sexual orientation. I see the image of God in all humans, period. And to me, that is just, it's foundational to the way I live.
I agree. I just fail to do it.
Oh, I didn't say I do it perfectly.
You know, I think about, I had some workmen in my house this week. We had a repair that we needed, and I don't know these two gentlemen, but the whole time they were here, I kept reminding myself, look for the image of God in these people.
Mhm.
And I think that changes the dynamic of the relationship. It probably is, it's important to do it with ourselves. It's important to do it with the people that we are engaged with on a day-to-day basis. And it's important to do it with the people that are driving us to distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, you don't get to only see the image of God in the people that you like.
As much as we want to,
Mhm.
as much as we wish to.
Mhm.
Nope.
And as much as we may wish to deprive the people that we disagree with, or those people, the ones that drive us to distraction, as much as we may wish to withhold that from them, it does not change the fact that they are stamped with the image of God, as everyone is.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're answering your own question with the reframe.
Mhm.
Seeing clearly that the other is the image of God changes everything. It changes the dynamic. It changes how you respond to that person, how you look at that person, facial
Mhm.
expressions. It changes your behavior when you're in contact with that person. I am partial because I have a fondness for children and my own children. I'm partial to child of God because only because of what it does to me, only
Mm-hmm.
because of how, so that might not work for you or anybody else, but like when I say child of God, I think of someone who is continually growing, is in need of nurturance, wants to be safe and held and picked up and rocked and cared for. I don't see these as infantilizing. They actually help me to be very tender uh, toward the other person. And then I start to see, the more and more I do it, I've started to see not monsters in the people that are being really awful with their behavior. I see massive tantrums.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoo, that child is tantruming. They're really hurting, really upset, right? Again, I don't do it perfectly either, but working with, oh, there's a child of God. There's a child of God. As I'm walking through the grocery store, I have found as is really helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't frame it quite the same way, but I totally see why you do and why it works for you. For me, there is a difference between seeing the image of God in someone and their behavior. And to me, those are two very different things. I can be very angry at the behavior of someone. I can completely disagree with their behavior. I can find it very offensive, but that doesn't take away that within them is the image of God. And to me, their behavior and their soul, their being are two different things. Because I would never want to be judged on my worst behavior. I would never want to be judged on my worst day. And sadly, my kids and my spouse have seen that.
Yes.
It's a really hard, really, really hard thing to do. And I don't want it to, I guess I just want to hold space for that being able to see the image of God in someone is really hard when you're angry with their behavior. And the other thing is seeing the image of God in someone does not excuse their behavior. And I think Christianity, some parts of Christianity have taken it to that space where all behavior is excused because someone is the image of God, and that is not true for me personally. Your behavior does not excuse you being a child of God, you being created in the image of God does not excuse your behavior. You still have agency and you are making choices that may be hurting other people. It doesn't mean you're not created in the image of God. It just means you're making some human choices right now that aren't so great.
I think that's why these conversations are so important, because someone who is acting out of the trauma that have experienced or are experiencing in their lives is unable to see the image of God in themselves at that moment. I think so. It is up to us, and I'm thinking these conversations create the space where we can at least be mindful of how we are reacting and what we can do to create the space and create the environment, create the crucible where that hurting person, that scared person can find their way back to see the image of God in themselves.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end of our time today. So do you want to say something in closing? So what would you like people to take away from this conversation?
Oh, that's a good question. I just want to add really quick. This is just kind of an add-on to the end of what we were saying, that we shouldn't forget that we're children of God too. And that's maybe why, and the image of God is in us. And that's why we have limits. And that's why it's okay to be enraged with the way that you are treated or your neighbor is treated. So to your point, Aemina, like we can, yeah, I think if we practice looking at everybody as having the image of God and but don't see it in ourselves, we risk becoming a doormat and we risk becoming a martyr. And that isn't necessary or true to the image of God in us.
Yeah.
I just want to tag that on.
All right. Well, this is another rich discussion. Thank you. Thank you both. So we'll see you again another time on another conversation with Aemina and Lee.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.